What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. I am Joey Powell. With me, as always, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran. A happy Easter Sunday to those of you who celebrate. Those of you who don't, happy Sunday to you. Appreciate you joining us here. Sean was talking before we started recording tonight. A lot has happened since the last time we did a Coast to Coast, so we felt like tonight we needed to bring to you guys what we could bring because the Tar Heels are now looking for a new head man in the big chair. And as Sherelle and Sean and I sit here on Sunday evening, the 4th of April, Inside Carolina has been able to whittle it down to about five candidates. And Greg Barnes listed those five on the Inside Carolina Premium Message boards. And what we thought we would do is break down the pluses and minuses of what these five candidates would be bringing to North Carolina. And I want to share again, we don't have, the three of us have no inside information as to who might be leading this. I think everybody has their opinion as to probably who's going to get the job, but Bubba Cunningham and Chancellor Guskowitz are playing this incredibly close to the vest, and I don't think that's a bad thing for Tar Heel Nation. I know a lot of message board posters want information, they want up-to-date stuff, but inside Carolina, we're not going to report things unless we can confirm them. But what we can confirm is that there are at least five names that Greg Barnes feels comfortable reporting and sharing with you. And we're going to break all those down right now. Those five, in no particular order, are Hubert Davis, who is an assistant coach at North Carolina, has been with North Carolina for 9 years after leaving the desk at ESPN College Game Day. He's been there since then, has no prior head coaching experience, but has been coaching the UNC JV team for a few years. Had a good pro career, played for the Knicks. Who else did he play for? Y'all remember?
Played for the Wizards at the end. I remember that.
All right. Sherelle,
I,
anybody
I
else?
remember that. I remember the Knicks. That's pretty much all I
Okay.
remember.
Yeah, I felt like
Yeah.
he may have been a career Nick, but Sean corrected me there. So that's Hubert Davis. Was also a Dean Smith recruit and player. By the way, I need to throw that out there. Wes Miller, who played for Coach Roy Williams early on in Roy's tenure at North Carolina, played for James Madison, then transferred to North Carolina because he wanted to be a coach after he got done playing. And since then, he has been, I believe, an assistant at Elon, an assistant at UNCG, and the head coach at UNCG. Am I missing any stops there, Sherelle?
I don't think so. No.
All right. Wes Miller has had a fairly good record since he's been at UNCG. He did get them to what, one or two tournament appearances? I don't have notes in front of me, so
Two.
he's two tournament appearances. Thank you, and has done fairly well with that program. They've been very consistent, and I do think there are reasons to like him, and we'll get into those in a few moments. Speaking of a few moments, Mark Few, who actually has his undefeated Gonzaga Bulldogs in tomorrow night's national championship game. Mark Few's name has been mentioned. He is linked with the search for whatever reason. Mark Few has been at Gonzaga for quite some time. I think since the late 80s. Again, they are attempting to become the first team since Indiana in 76 to go undefeated and win the national championship. So they will play Baylor tomorrow night. That's Gonzaga. And Gonzaga, you may remember North Carolina beat them in the title in 2017. They've been successful, but they've played in the West Coast Conference forever. You don't really get to see them that often just because they play so late. Brad Stevens, former Butler coach, took Butler to the national championship game in 2015, had them fairly successful on an annual basis, left and has been with the Boston Celtics for about the last 5 years, I believe. Brad Stevens is a young guy, is from Indiana. I believe his wife is on the board of regents at Butler. But Brad has plenty of ties to Indiana as a state and Indiana basketball. Current coach of the Celtics. And the final one that Greg mentioned that there has been some interest. I have no idea how far they've proceeded, but Greg feels like there hasn't been a lot of post discussion outside of initial interest. Is Villanova's Jay Wright? Jay Wright, been at Villanova for quite some time. Was a disciple of Raleigh Massimino, if my memory serves. Has won two championships, including one in 2016. The North Carolina fans will never be able to get out of their seared memories. And then won the one in 2018. Has turned Villanova into a national contender. So, boys, before we start breaking this down, I want to make sure everybody takes a second to rate and review us. We appreciate you here on the Coast to Coast podcast and all of InsideCarolina.com stuff. If you had not subscribed, make sure you can subscribe. You'll get to see all this content. Right now, the staff at IC Sherrell, I don't know he has slept. Ben Sherman has not slept. Greg Barnes has not slept. Um, just all of the people that are churning out content, Ross and Gregory, and a lot of these guys have been really putting in the hours. So if you are not a subscriber, a premium subscriber to Inside Carolina right now, you're an idiot. You're missing out. Like I may sound harsh, but if you're listening to this podcast, you need to go ahead and fork over the money, sign up, get that premium access. Premium access also gets you an extra 10% off of Johnny T-shirt. We appreciate them sponsoring the show. But yeah, rate, review, subscribe, then subscribe to premium content from Inside Carolina, InsideCarolina.com, and then support Johnny T-shirt. We'll get to Johnny T more in a little bit. All right, Sherrell, I'm going to start with you. Uh, let's start first with Mark Few, and I want to see kind of what your thoughts are on how he may fit with North Carolina. And then Sean, I'm going to let you sprinkle in kind of the same analysis and where you feel like his style of play may or may not fit with the culture at North Carolina. Sure, let's start. Mark Few.
I think if you're handicapping this as far as like who would be the absolute best hire when it comes to coaching acumen, when it comes to winning experience, and when it comes to embracing the Carolina culture, including style of play, I think Mark Few is clearly number one. Obviously, he's got his team playing for a national championship later tonight, and could be the first in school history. He's been there before. Isaiah Hicks and Theo Pinson and Joel Berry had other ideas, but I think he's an excellent coach. And now the thing is, before he was kind of getting it done with, players from overseas and some development, which he still does, but now he is recruiting at a level in which schools like North Carolina and Duke and Kentucky and Kansas typically recruit. I mean, Hunter Salas was North Carolina's #1 target for a good amount of time, and he got him, and he's in there with Chet Holmgren. He just got Jalen Suggs. Drew Timme, while not a top 10 type player, was a top 30 player. So he's able to get talent, and I think when you add that with the winning experience, and then just the style of play is so much fun to watch. To me, probably more than I realized, style of play I think is important for the team that you cover, or the team for listeners that you root for. I think it's a bigger deal than maybe I thought before. So Few definitely has style of play. He has everything to me. I think he would be slam dunk home run. I don't know anyone who would say that's not a great hire, or what is North Carolina doing? Like I think that would be consensus, just a great hire.
There's a certain amount of flex that would come to with North Carolina taking a coach who had just coached in a national championship game like they did in 2003. I know this is different because Mark Few is not a North Carolina alum. He did play at Oregon. He has only coached at Gonzaga, and I think that's important to remember. He was a GA there, an assistant coach there, and has been a coach there, but has amassed a 627 and 124 record
So,
while he's out there.
so he didn't have any head coaching experience before he got the Gonzaga job. Is that what you're saying?
That's weird, man. Yeah, that's a
Okay.
great point by you. It's funny that you stuck with that.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, thanks for bringing that up. Sean, you're a lot closer geographically to Mark Few, so I'm going to assume that you've already spoken with his people. But since that's just a brutal assumption and we're not going to actually go any farther with that because people might take us for serious here, tell me, how do you feel about the style of play? Because to me, it looks a little familiar to what North Carolina tries to do, starting with with inside out basketball.
Well, last time I saw Mark Few, we were crossing paths. It was just a side note. Brandon Williams, he had decommitted from Arizona. It was a hot name for a few weeks, and I got to the game late with California traffic, and Coach Few was leaving as I got there, so he obviously saw what he needed to see, and well, it wasn't much of in terms of offering Brandon Williams. So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of just strictly style of play, I mean, right now they're playing at I think the fourth fastest tempo in the country, and that has steadily increased for them over the past few years. So once again, you're getting, at least lately, an up tempo style, and it's, you look at Ken Palm, and it's really trended up. But I think more importantly is the offensive efficiency. They've been ranked #1 the past 3 years, and that's really with 3 years of turnover.
Yeah.
Last year I think the question was, their bigs are legit enough to win a championship, but do they have the guards? And you look at their guards, they're led by probably not many people can name the two, but Ryan Woolridge, who was a transfer from North Texas, and then Admon Gilder, who was a transfer from Texas A&M. Yep. Who I think had a decent game against Carolina in the tournament. But, those two aren't they're not huge names. And now all of a sudden you have Jalen Suggs, who obviously is a top 3 pick, but, offensively, defensively, they're fun to watch. They play at a high pace. They've been able to really, you look at what they've been able to do since the title game, and they've had high turnover with some, you look at Clark and Hachimura. So they've been able to produce draft picks, but they've also, I think with them, they've been ahead of the transfer game. So like right now, we can talk about the transfer portal, but that's where everybody is right now. But they've been living in that transfer world whether it's been sitting guys for a year, like Brandon Clark, or, having the grad transfer guys that are coming in and playing immediately. And they've been doing that at a high level the last few years to keep Gonzaga playing at a high level. So I think, you have that a little bit. And once again, I think a big part also is Tommy Lloyd, Gonzaga's top assistant. He's been the one that's been in the international waters. He's been the one that I think has been able to kind of initiate some of these high level recruiting conversations lately. And I would imagine if Mark Few were to leave, he'd probably be the first in line for the Gonzaga job. And then
you're already getting deep into the musical chairs, huh?
But then, I think when you're watching, during the games, Mark Few's great at making adjustments, great at kind of adapting on the fly. I think the main question is, why would he want to leave such a great situation he's put himself in the Pacific Northwest? For the most part, he's been able to dominate the West Coast, even with the Pac-12. And he's been, kind of first in the international waters, really not first, but kind of up there in the transfers. And now they kind of have been playing the one and done game. They're new at it, but they've been playing it well, obviously with Suggs. But as we know, one miss and you could be in a lot of hot water. But I agree with Sherrell. If we're just looking stylistically and based on what they've done, at least lately, you couldn't really complain about what Mark Few has put together.
Yeah, and something first off, Sean, I appreciate the personnel angle of that. I think a lot of people have underestimated what Few's been able to do, not just recruiting to a West Coast Conference school, to a team in Spokane, Washington, to a Jesuit school. Like there's a lot of nuance there that I think he's done really well at. But I love that you brought in the international and the transfer piece of that, because it's been a huge portion of what's made them so consistently successful over these last however many years. Guys, I want to ask you both a question here. Instead of just kind of looking at kind of a high level analysis, do you think that Few and his success would carry over into the ACC? And, Sean, I think you make a great point about, why would he leave Gonzaga? And some of the people that are, I guess, devil's advocates or proponents of why he would leave suggest the competition and the step up in competition of being able to play against, the best in college basketball night in and night out. And I want to say, do you feel like that would translate to the ACC fairly well?
Well, I mean, I think the ACC has a far ways to go to get back to that level. But in terms of, I do think it would transfer. I mean, once again, I think the big question really with any of these coaches that we're going to talk about is recruiting. I think right now Mark Few's recruiting at the highest level there is, but I think it's also they've been able to focus on one to two players. And once again, Hunter Salas, they were in earlier than Carolina on Hunter. They got him to come to campus before everything shut down. So I do think it can translate. I think, once again, he's kind of a big name, which would get even bigger, I think, with, the Carolina blue, when he's going into a gym with Carolina on his shirt. Mm-hmm. But I do think it would definitely be an adjustment period in terms of they have a very, the machine is running at full speed, and he would have to, it's not running full speed right now at Carolina, so he would have to get it going. I think he could do that, but I think there would still be some adjustments.
Sherrell, does the 58 years old, does that age bother you for Mark Few?
Not particularly, because I think the days or I, will say that for when we talk about another candidate. But I think the days mostly of, staying at a school for 25, 30 years are pretty much over,
Right.
just because of how the college landscape has changed, because the NBA is just so hot right now, because they can offer more money. And a lot of times guys like to take the leap because, frankly, recruiting for most folks is not fun. And that
Right.
was one of the things that I think kept Roy Williams going, is that he actually enjoyed recruiting. So
Yeah.
if recruiting gets old for you, or you tire of it, I just don't know, if you want to stay in that grind for 20, 25, 30 years anymore, just because recruiting is so much more than it was, say, back in 2000. um so that doesn't bother me, because I said all that to say, 58, if you can get a good 10 to 12 years out of someone like Mark Few, you take it and you figure things out
Yeah.
in 2030 or 2031 or whatever. So that the age isn't really a concern.
And I had to throw that out there. It was something I feel like has been a talking point for a lot of folks. Um, okay, so I want to take a second, and before we start getting to the other four candidates, I want to take a second and give a shout out to Johnny T-shirt. Johnny T-shirt has absolutely been huge supporters of Inside Carolina and all of the content that Inside Carolina puts out. Right now, you might be looking for some new Carolina gear. You might be all in your feelings because of Roy Williams' retirement. You want to go buy some commemorative stuff. Go to johnnytshirt.com, hit him up, take care of him. If you don't like basketball, I don't really know why you'd be listening to this, but you can get non-basketball gear from Johnny T. Top-notch stuff, Jordan Brand, Nike, Columbia, whatever you want. Johnny T-shirt is your place for it. Hit him up. Use your premium Inside Carolina subscription that you just got because we mentioned it earlier. Get your extra 10% off of their already really low, extremely competitive prices, and then swag out with your new stuff. All right. We appreciate Johnny T-shirt. Take a quick second. Let some national guys run some ads in here. We'll come right back, talk about the other four candidates on the list of potential replacements for Roy Williams, who vacates the big chair at North Carolina's basketball program. Hang tight. Okay, talk about the next candidate of the five that Greg Barnes has identified as being a part of the North Carolina candidate pool for Roy Williams' replacement. Boys, I mentioned Brad Stevens earlier, and I got some dates jacked up. This is why you should actually write your show prep down instead of reading. I said that he coached Butler to the 2015 national championship game. That was incorrect. Duke actually won that title in 2015 against Wisconsin. Butler was against them in 2010, which, holy Lord, how old are we? Um, Brad Stevens played at DePaul University, DEPAUW, not DePaul. 44 years old, still a very spry guy. Was an assistant at Butler, but then had only been an assistant at Butler before he became the head coach at Butler. I coached Butler from 2007 to 2013 and has been with the Celtics since then. So I got some dates mixed up. Forgive me, guys. Maybe John can do some editing to make me not sound so much like a buffoon at the beginning of the show. Same thing I want you to come back with, Sean, about personnel, Brad Stevens. And I think a lot of people got really enamored with what he did at Butler because they'd never heard of Butler before. But if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit of insight as to how he works with his style of coaching and what sort of players he might bring to North Carolina just based on his college experience, because I don't think he can bring guys from the NBA back to Chapel Hill.
No, I mean, no, unfortunately, can't bring Jaylen Brown to Chapel Hill. But just looking at his Butler career, it was 6 years, 2008 to 2013, and obviously the hanging his hat on the two championship games, which once again for Butler, and this is really before they were even in the Big East. So what he did was pretty remarkable.
Right.
But I think when you look at whether it's tempo or offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, nothing's really going to stand out. I mean, they played at a slower pace, even kind of in the 200. So from a stylistic up and down, you weren't going to get that. But I think obviously what got him to the Celtics was his in-game coaching, his sets, his plays, being able to attack matchups. I still remember that the Duke game, the championship game, where they went inside against Zubac the first two possessions, and the big guy just missed it, but they were looking to attack him, and they, similar to watching the UCLA Gonzaga game with Cronin, of looking to attack mismatches. So I think that's what drew the eye of Danny Ainge. And then you look at Boston, and I just went back. I was looking at more of the stats from last year, and there's nothing, in terms of pace, they were middle of the pack. Offensive efficiency, they're near the top of the league. Defensive, not doing as hot. But I think once again, you've seen on the message boards leading up to Roy's retirement of, really need to adapt to more of an NBA style, right? And obviously, if you have a coach coming from the NBA, he knows how to do that. So I think from a style perspective, it's not going to be the up and down. Not saying that he wouldn't be able to adjust, but I think it would, from a style perspective, it's going to be, really utilizing the strengths of the players, being very well prepared for the opponent. I still remember the game in Maui when UNC played Butler, and Butler played hard, and they knew, and they were very well prepared for that game. Once again, the big question, not the same question as Mark Few, but you have what everybody called Boy Wonder when he went to the Celtics for his coaching acumen, but now it comes to recruiting. Butler, he wasn't, he obviously got Gordon Hayward, and he kind of identified talent, but he wasn't recruiting, the top 20, 30, 40, 50 guys like you need to be doing at Carolina. I think once again, we're entering a different world in recruiting, where we talked about maybe it's really the 20 to 50 guys and identifying the right ones. And I think he can put the time and identify, the right ones. But once again, everybody has their question marks. There's no Roy Williams kind of waiting in the wings. And I think that's the biggest question mark, is that, recruiting at that top tier level.
Yeah, we talked about that on Inside Carolina Live with Tommy Ashley and I yesterday on WCHL at 10 a.m., which all of you should be checking out. Sherrell, would that change if Brad Stevens came to North Carolina? Do you think he would play more of an up-tempo style than he played at Butler, just because of the different types of players he may be able to get? Or you still think he would just kind of lean on that in-game, recognize where your mismatches are, play to that based on your athletes?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he changed, because I think once you become a head coach and you develop your style, that you kind of stick with that. Obviously, I always talk about tweaking. I think you can tweak it and add variations to it, but typically you are who you are at your core. And I think Stevens has shown, he's one of the best X's and O's people in the business. I think everybody says that. I do think the mythology of Brad Stevens has grown over the years because of those
Yes.
back-to-back national championship games. And I do think from a Carolina perspective, the fan base, because it was against Duke, I think that adds a little something to it for the fan base. Not saying he wouldn't come in where he'd be the hire and do a great job, but he is not. To me, he is not as perfect as a candidate as Mark Few. There are a few more question marks with Brad Stevens. I know people are going to get on me for saying that, but to Sean's point, the recruiting thing, um, he recruited at Butler. It's just a little bit different than recruiting at North Carolina. Not only that, he hasn't recruited in almost 9 years.
Yeah.
And everything has changed over the last 8 or 9 years. And then I would wonder how his NBA sensibilities would mesh with, kind of college styles where you have to play different styles every night. In the NBA, typically, what you're going to see most of the time. Like they'll, throw in a little, something here or there, but typically, what guys are going to run. It's just, can you stop it because one team has a better player? That's kind of where that is. But how will he match up against different styles of play? I think is a question mark. And again, I'm being very nitpicky because
Sure.
he would be a great hire for North Carolina. I don't want to sound like I'm poo-pooing him at all, but and you talk about flex. I mean, that would be the ultimate flex of North Carolina hiring away a person that another school thinks they're going to hire in a year,
Yeah.
away from the first or second greatest NBA franchise, depending upon who you ask, in NBA history. So that would be a huge flex for them for sure. But yeah, I think he would be a great hire, but I do think there are a couple of question marks there.
I think North Carolina fans have a little bit of a kick dog syndrome for obvious reasons. A lot of it has to do with what's happened in football. Um, I think the Guthridge to Doherty transition has got a little folks really on edge about this because they were spoiled by the way that North Carolina was able to bring in Roy Williams to kind of extend the Dean Smith era. And I think that kick dog syndrome could be problematic with a guy like Brad Stevens because you still feel like he would always have an eye back on the NBA. And that's something I think a lot of Tar Heel fans would probably struggle with even after the elation of bringing a guy like Stevens in were to wear off. Um, Next guy, and I want to again throw this out there. There was some initial interest, I believe, showed on behalf of Jay Wright. As of yesterday, Greg Barnes did not feel comfortable that there had been any sort of reciprocation or extension of those conversations. We're going to mention Jay Wright briefly here. I think he has the best national or the best college basketball pedigree of anybody. If you just look at his accolades, two national championships that we mentioned, three Final Fours. He's been the Naismith Coach of the Year twice, NABC Coach of the Year once. Is 59 years old, played ball at Bucknell, has been an assistant in a lot of different places, Rochester, Drexel, Nova, like I mentioned with Raleigh Massimino, UNLV. He was under Tark for a little bit. Then was the head coach at Hofstra before joining Villanova's program as the head coach in 2001, and has amassed a very impressive 606 wins against 271 losses at Villanova. Sherrell, going to you. Jay Wright, do you feel like there's even worth mentioning here? Thoughts? Would you like to see him in Chapel Hill? Do you feel like he would be a good crossover from the Big East to the ACC?
So, a question. So, he didn't have any major conference head coaching experience before getting the Villanova job?
Unless Hofstra was in the Big Ten and I didn't know about it, a no would be the
Interesting.
answer. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird, huh?
Yeah, yeah. So, no, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but he would be a great hire for UNC as well. Much like Mark Few, shown a propensity to, as of late, recruit at the highest level. Beat Carolina for a player like Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who was kind of in the Roy Williams wheelhouse, and if he comes back to school, will be first team preseason All American,
Easily.
National Player of the Year type. And then he's done it different ways. He's had some quote unquote stars, and then he's developed guys who maybe we never heard of, guys who were top 150, top 200, and developed them into really good players. Their style of play is not one that I particularly enjoy, but again, I'm not making the hire. It would be very different for Carolina fans. Not a lot of action in the post, lots of threes, very slow tempo. It's kind of the profile over the years. There was one year they played really, really fast. I can't remember what it was, but they played really, really fast one year. So, it'd be a great hire. It seems like a long shot, but I think it would be a great hire. And there's not a bunch to nitpick there either. I think even less so than Brad Stevens, because Jay Wright has done it for so long. I mean, he's been in Villanova for almost
Yeah.
20 years, I think.
20. He just finished his 20th season there.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. There's a bit of head scratching going on, and he's one of those where again I love the pedigree. I just don't see like I see Few as more of an option in my mind than Jay Wright would be. Sean, thoughts about fit stylistically in Chapel Hill from Jay Wright?
Yeah, I mean, from a stylistic point of view, I think Sherrell hit it. The team, once again, there, wherever you slot him on your tier list, he with 2 championships in those 3 years, he's excuse me, he's up there. Right now, Jeremiah Robinson Earl would have been playing that stretch 4 for Carolina. He was playing the 5 for Villanova, so they're basically playing 5 out. Playing 5 out this year. Very heavy, 3-point focused.
Yeah.
I think this year they ranked in the top 30% or top 30 in terms of 3-pointers attempted. Usually it's top 10, 15. So definitely different styles. Once again, a guy that can kind of, based on his, the players, he can kind of scheme a little bit towards that. But for him, he's a he makes perfect sense in Villanova, perfect sense in the Big East. Whereas Mark Few, you could maybe make the argument, hey, like maybe he wants a challenge at Carolina or in a, Power Five conference. But Jay Wright, I think, is, that would be more of a stretch.
All right. So we've talked about the guys that are, quote, non-family guys. And I know that there's going to be some Peter Griffin jokes in there somewhere, but I think something that is probably on the front of every North Carolina fan's mind is, does UNC go inside the family here, or do they go outside the family? And Sherrell, you've been really eloquent in saying this. You did it on the mega cast that we did the night that Roy retired, but that the best coach may not be the best fit. And I think that's very important because I think that is giving credence to the power, the stroke, and the shadow of the Carolina family and how much of that is involved with the culture of winning and vice versa. So the last two guys we're going to talk about tonight, Wes Miller and Hubert Davis, are both Carolina basketball alums. Have both had their chances to sit on benches. One has been a head coach, one is not. I want to start with Wes Miller, and Wes is younger than I am, so I'm assuming he's a freaking baby. Wes is 182 and 136, so he's between 550 and 600 winning percentage at UNCG. Was at North Carolina from 2004 to 2007, was a member of the 05 championship team. He played probably 2 years in the pros, but as I mentioned earlier, and I did miss something, guys, he was an assistant at Elon, then at High Point, and then at UNCG, and has been the head coach at UNCG for 10 years. Sherrell had not been a head coach at a major university before he got the job at UNCG.
Interesting.
Yeah, just picking up on a thread here. Okay, so guys, I don't want to beat this family versus non-family thing to death, but I think it's absolutely the elephant in the room here. I don't want to speculate about how much it's going to play, how much it's going to play into Bubba Cunningham's decision. Easy for me to say. Sean, what is your impression of Wes Miller as a coach, knowing that he's only been in the SoCon, but has had a modicum of success and has gotten seemingly more consistent as he's been there?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the last 5 years, and he's had UNC Greensboro in the mix, and this is a conference, maybe not as much this year where they won it, but really the last few years where you could make a strong argument that it could have been a 2 to 3 bid league where those top 2 or 3 teams are more competitive than half of the middle of the pack in the power conferences. So I think it's been impressive for to maintain that level of consistency. He's been able to get some or at least build up some very strong players. You have Isaiah Miller this year, and you can look back at the rosters, and they've had a few big time players at that level. I think from a style perspective, it's been talked about on the message boards and there have been articles, but at the beginning when he first got the job, you look at the team and they were running up and down top 10 in tempo, but he realized it wasn't the right style for those types of players. And now you look at it and they're definitely slower tempo, but they're gonna adjust. They're gonna game good game plan. They're gonna offensive rebound. In terms of offensive defensive efficiency, they're kind of in the middle of the pack for the most part. But I think for him, it's been impressive what he's been able to do the last 5 years. I think really over those years, especially more I guess ever since they played Gonzaga in the tournament, he kind of said, is maybe a school in the A10 or maybe another school, kind of a lower tier school in the Power Five, or are they going to go after him? And obviously he stayed at UNCG, but at the same time, he always had something to come back to in terms of he knew he would have a strong team and knew he could potentially get them to that next level. I think once again, it is a big jump, but you look in the past and it's usually a big jump to kind of get started. There's only so many, as I mentioned, Roy Williams are the top at their sport, and now they're making that transition. Once again, I think the main question goes to recruiting. If you're, And once again, it's a little different now because are they going to be going after the top 5, 10 guys if they're going to be going to, G League or, going, and once again, I think there's also the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is, I don't even want to bring it up, but it's not like the FBI scandal didn't happen. That did
Yeah.
happen. And just because the head coaches of the schools involved didn't get in any trouble doesn't mean that stuff isn't going on. So, you're fighting now the G League battle versus also the teams that are willing to, get dirtier. So I guess where I was going with that was if he's walking into a recruit's room and he's going up against Calipari, Coach K, whoever, does he get that same level of respect? Not off the bat, but he could build it up and depend on who the assistants are. But I think once again, recruiting would be the main question of does he have that cachet right off the bat to be able to, get the top 20 guys that UNC needs to stay at a high level. Not saying that he can't easily build into that, but I think that's obviously the question.
Yeah, Rel, you wanted to throw something on top of that?
Yeah, but before we go deeper into West, I wanted to go back to the fact that we kind of have these, it seems like the 5 candidates, and obviously they seem like they're kind of in 2 tiers.
Mm-hmm.
I think you were talking about the family shadow and all that good stuff. What I think that shows is that the powers that be at UNC, the chancellor and the AD, know that the family ideal is important. So they want to make sure that it is respected when they are interviewing people and when they're going after people. But I also think what it shows is that there's a small group of people who they feel have the winning pedigree as well as the, I guess, the reputation to come in and say, yes, I respect these things. And I know that it's been built over, 60, 70 years. However, I still want to do things in a manner in which I'm comfortable while incorporating some of these things in there. And I think when you see those 3, that's kind of like, okay, those are the 3 who can make that claim. That's what it says to me. And then what it says to me that the other 2 candidates are, we'll call them internal candidates, even though Wes Miller isn't at UNC, is that they would rather have someone who believes in these ideals that the Carolina program espouses, than someone who may, be a good coach or an average coach, but come in and not respect them. And so that's why it seems like there's to our readers, it seems like, there's the best of the best, and then there's these 2 guys who are like, what? It seems like a pretty vast difference between the 2 groups. And I think that is the difference in that they don't see anyone with the upside in the middle to come in and just kind of give them free reign, and someone who would command the respect where they could kind of fuse their style into the Carolina ideals and traditions. So I think that is important to note.
I think it's important too that, and I'm sorry to step on you. I want to kind of string this out a little bit. I think it's important too that a lot of the things that North Carolina fans love about this program is the same things that make the family unique. There are things about the tradition that Dean Smith started and has been extended by Roy Williams that folks cannot find at any other program, and other programs have tried to replicate it. Hashtag brotherhood. And I think that that's not something to necessarily shy away from and think is a bad thing. Now, it may, if you elect to limit yourself to that lineage and that family tree, pardon the pun, then it may limit you to not getting the best coach, because I think we can all say that the best available coaches are not Roy Williams prodigies or Dean Smith prodigies right now. And I think it's important that people recognize, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have the culture that North Carolina has here, because it's also, while it may handicap you if you want to keep that string alive, it's also what makes things attractive to these top tier coaches that have really cush situations elsewhere. I hope that makes sense.
Right. And that's why it's such a difficult decision for the chancellor and for the AD.
Yeah.
I mean, North Carolina is about winning, and it's been about winning for a long time, but it's not only about winning, and it's not only been about winning for a long time. So it's just trying to balance those 2 things. You're gonna upset people no matter who you hire. I think the fan base will eventually rally around whoever the hire is. But if you hire, if everything goes wonderfully and you're able to, procure Mark Few from Spokane, and he comes to Chapel Hill, there's going to be a contingent of people who are like, they should have kept it in the family. This isn't the Carolina I grew up with, and that's a
Yeah.
completely understandable feeling. If they hire Wes Miller, who I guess we can go back to in a second, and aren't able, or maybe didn't, if they hire Wes Miller,
Yeah.
I think that'd be a situation where where some people say, well, why didn't they go for any number of other coaches in tier two? Their goal isn't to win, and that's a completely understandable position, because you want to win. That's the whole reason people play sports. You want to win. So it's just tough. You're trying to balance those two things, and that's what the AD and that's what the chancellor are doing right now. As far as Wes, I think what makes him so attractive to Carolina fans is that he is 37 years old, 38 years old. And so the feeling is like, you had those 30 years with Coach Smith, and then you
Yeah.
had 18 years with Roy Williams. It's like, if Wes is just, if Wes can be a good coach, don't have to worry about this for another 25, 30 years, because he's not going to take another job unless something goes horribly, horribly wrong. So it's the hope that he is the next in line, that he's kind of the chosen one. I think that's what makes so many Carolina fans gravitate towards him. And then, like you said, you're gonna laugh at me when I say connective tissue again, but the connective tissue between
I
Coach
love
Smith.
that line though, man. I'm sorry. I know I was clowning you the other night on the on the Slack group, but that's such a great visual if people
uh,
can't really grab that. But go ahead.
Yeah, between Coach Smith and Roy, and then into Wes, and the idea that Carolina basketball, while tweaked and somewhat different, and having incorporated Wes Miller's ideas, will still kind of be Carolina basketball, is an attractive thing to a lot of people. But I also get why people would say, well, he's the UNCG coach. He hasn't won anything of consequence. He hasn't beaten a really great team. He hasn't advance deep into the NCAA tournament. I get all those criticisms. I understand them. But I again, it's that balance between understanding the family and winning, and trying to parse the two. I think that is so difficult. And Wes is just kind of one of those guys who's right there on the line. Like, if he had another 3 years at UNCG where he won
Hmm.
30 or something games, I think everybody would be fine with it. But the fact that, of his 10 years, five have been great, five have been okay or
Yeah.
bad, that throws things in the air. And he's an unknown at the ACC level. So I think that's part of it.
It's weird, man. I mean, you would want to say that if the Wes Miller hire goes right, then he has a higher ceiling because of
Right.
his age. I don't think the ceiling is higher, because I think a national championship is potential if you get fewer Stevens or Wright or any of those guys. But I think maybe the room is bigger and a high ceiling. You got like cathedral ceiling, and it's just a wider ceiling too, because Wes is so young. I'm terrible with these architectural analogies, but I'm doing what I can. All right. Anything else you guys want to throw in about Wes Miller before we hit our last candidate? No.
Nope.
All
Nope.
right. Hearing none, we head to the last candidate, which, depending on who you talk to, there are a lot of folks that feel that Hubert Davis was brought in to North Carolina to succeed Roy Williams. And I don't know. I have never heard that from anybody that knows. Sherrell, do you feel like that's just a colloquial understanding, or do you feel like that's actually what the plan was?
I'm sorry. I was testing on my phone. I apologize. Live radio. Okay, I said it again. Tell me what you're thinking. Sorry.
Sorry, I was bringing up Hubert Davis, and there were some folks who had the thought that he was brought in from ESPN
Okay.
to succeed Roy Williams whenever Roy left. Have you ever heard that from anybody inside the program, or do you feel like it's just a nice story?
First off, I'm so sorry. I feel
It's all
like I
right,
was
man.
I feel like I was in a Zoom call at work, and
It's not like we
someone
don't
just
have
caught
things
me.
going on right now. It's,
Feel
it's
like
fine.
I'm so sorry. I was just in another meeting. No, I don't think that's ever been expressed anywhere by anyone who would know,
Yeah.
publicly or privately. That could be the plan, and they just haven't said anything. But it kind of does make a lot of sense. I think because when he was hired, we were looking around and we were naming people. We thought this person made sense and this person made sense. We had a list of about five guys who we thought really made sense, and Hubert Davis was not on the list at all. Like, it was a pretty big surprise when we found out that he was hired.
Hmm.
And I think Roy. at that point, I don't think he was close to retirement, but I think he wanted to start thinking about it. And so maybe there's a situation where he says, Hubert has a chance. He has a chance to be great if he does X, Y, and Z. So maybe it was something like that, that he saw his, what people talk about, his honesty, how nice of a person he is, the fact that he played for Coach Smith, the fact that, he wasn't a 5-star recruit coming out of high school that kind of grinded his way into being a really, really good player and someone who made a lot of money in the NBA. So maybe he saw those qualities and said, there's something that can be molded there, because I really like Hubert. But as far as like, I'm hiring this person so that whenever it's time for me to retire, he can take over. I don't know that I've just never heard that expressed by anyone on or off the record.
I appreciate you
But
shooting
it
that
could,
down.
but it could be something, that was kind of, subconscious, like I said, that he saw all the qualities in Hubert Davis that maybe he saw himself or he saw in a great head coach.
Mm. Well, I appreciate you kind of shooting that down and taking that out of the assumption here. Guys, I want to, again, issue a retraction. Earlier, I think we said Hubert played for the Knicks, and Sean said that he wrapped his career with the Wizards. Man, I missed that one too. 92 to 96 with the New York Knicks, 96 and 7 with the Raptors, 97 2001 with the Mavs, where he actually led the
Ah,
league in 3-point percentage.
oh, you were in
In
college, so you weren't thinking about much then.
Wow. Did have that 2001 2002 year with the Wizards, which is also a Jordan year. 2 years with the Pistons, and then wrapped his career with the Nets. And I don't even know if he played a game for the Nets. Yeah, he did. He appeared in 14 games for the Nets. Um, but did play North Carolina from 88 to 92. Was a first round pick, 20th overall, selected by the New York Knicks. So he's been, again, aside from being a talking head on ESPN College Game Day, he's only been an assistant in North Carolina, and he came in 2012. So, Sherelle, I want to start with you, and I want you to kind of lay out what was his job as an assistant at North Carolina, and what has his job been up until now as an assistant. Yeah, I know the staff has always split up the scout on different teams, but how involved has he been in recruiting? Like, what has his typical role been as an assistant?
So yeah, they split up the scout. So he handles that, kind of on a rotation. Of course, he was the head coach of the JV team for a few years. I'm not sure if it was 2 or 3 years. So he had that responsibility. And then of course, if you're an assistant, you have to recruit.
Hmm.
And I think it's been a mixed bag, I think, to be honest with him, as far as it comes to recruiting. At North Carolina, we say this all the time, Roy Williams kind of ran the show. So you don't have a 100% feel for exactly the type of recruiter that an assistant might be. Because, Roy Williams was the only one who handed out offers. There's one time that Roy Williams didn't hand out an offer, and that was for a long-term relationship that Steve Robinson had with a player who's now at Kansas. He did what was asked of him, I think. And he really connects with guys, I think, once they get on campus. I think that's where his strong suit is. Once guys get on campus with mentoring and being there for them, and just being someone to talk to, kind of being, a counselor almost, to these players. And then, obviously he's a shooter. So I think he works with guys some on that aspect, works with the guards and everything. So that's the kind of stuff I know. As far as the gritty day to day, like in practice, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not in practice, but I think that is kind of him in a nutshell. And to a T though, every single person you ask just talks about the niceness, the grace in which he does pretty much everything. And I think that probably counts for something. But I think to Sean's point, the recruiting will be something that would, were he to be the hire, would be something that definitely would require attention, and something that we'd have to look at, because it's just such a huge unknown.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things when you start looking at pluses and minuses of each guy. One of the huge advantages for folks that want to see North Carolina continue on the trajectory that they've been on, uh, is that Hubert has been beside Roy Williams, and was there for 9 seasons. But by the same token, knowing how Roy ran the program, that's still weird to say from runs to ran. Knowing how Roy ran the program, like Sherelle said, he didn't get a lot of leeway to actually do things to lead the program aside from his work with the JV squad. And for this isn't me throwing the guy under the bus, but for a guy that's supposed to be such an integral shooter and was known for being a good shooter at UNC and in the league, UNC has not shot the ball well in the very recent past, and I think that's something to. It's not necessarily Hubert's fault, but I do think it's something that's going to come up in conversation. Sean, what are your thoughts on Hubert Davis as a potential replacement for Roy Williams, and where you might see um, some strengths or some weaknesses?
I think Sherrell hit it on the head. Is nobody really has a feel for how, what he's going to bring to the table, because once again, at Carolina as an assistant, I think when he got hired, everybody was kind of hoping, you're going to see all these stories of how Hubert, what you just talked about, in practices, how so-and-so went from a 20% free, 3-point shooter to a 40%, just completely fixing their shot or something to that extent, or, Hubert being talked about as one of the, top names in the game, et cetera. But that's not necessarily his fault by any means. I mean, he did what he had to do. I think going back to his, he played in the NBA. He was one of the top shooters to ever play in the NBA. He played under Pat Riley. He, was able to analyze the college games, being able to learn from Coach Williams. Recruiting. I think there's a comment in an article I was reading where he's such a straight shooter and an honest guy, is that he was like, why are these coaches or parents lying to me initially? And hopefully after 9 years, he kind of better understands, the cutthroat world of college hoops. I think with him and Wes, the big question is who's on his staff. I think that would be extremely important, whether that's from a recruiting standpoint or also a coaching standpoint. I went back as we were doing this to an article we did on Cole Anthony. At the time, nobody really had any information on Cole Anthony. Was able to chat with his dad, and he just couldn't stop talking about Hubert Davis. Really more about his work ethic. Kind of talking. Everybody knows he was a shooter, but all the time he put into watching film and improving his other areas. So you don't get to that level without having a strong work ethic. But once again, there's the comment in the scoop of he would make some tweaks stylistically, but once again, does he want to play up tempo, 4 out, 1 in? There's really no answer. Obviously, there's the JV and Coach Hass and CB did that as well, but it is a big question mark. But once again, he has the NBA pedigree. It seems like he has really bonded well with the players once they're in Chapel Hill, but there's a lot of good, and there's a lot of more just the feel, the question marks. But once again, with this, there is going to be a question mark with everybody, and I think it's not going to be answered in that first year, but really in those 2 to 3 years, how are things trending?
I'm glad you mentioned the relationship side of things. One of Hubert's always one of those that gets a lot of praise from guys in their senior speeches since he's been a part of the program. Sherrell, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I would just say I think with Hubert Davis and with Wes Miller, the unknown is scary, and I think people typically look at the unknown as a negative, but I think you can also look at the unknown as a positive. And to me, folks have been right or wrong clamoring for, a more quote unquote modern approach when it comes to UNC basketball, right? And they assume that if Hubert Davis is hired or if Wes Miller is hired, that it'll be Roy Williams 2.0, that it'll be, the same sets and the same style and, the same everything. There will be a lot of similarities, 100%, because that's who they learned under. But I think every great coach takes things from their mentor, adds to it, puts their own kind of personal stamp on it, and keeps things moving forward. So I think that's what you would hope for from, whether it's Wes Miller or Hubert Davis, if it's not one of those first three, because there are changes that need to be made at Carolina. I don't want to sugarcoat that and make it seem like, everything was great. I don't think if everything was great, Roy Williams wouldn't have retired. So there are things that need to be improved and upgraded and changed, and tweaked. But I think what those two offer is still, at the center, not to be like a corporate thing, but in the DNA, it's still North Carolina basketball. It might be slightly different, but it's still North Carolina basketball. I think that's what, those two bring. Yes, unknown, but the unknown can be positive too. I mean, it could be a situation where Hubert Davis has all these ideas, and because it was Roy Williams' system, he didn't want to impose that because he knows that Rollins was very successful, winning 75, 76% of his games, playing that style, playing a system, doing things his way. So why would you try to, change that, kind of in the back nine of Roy's, of his career? So maybe he comes out if he is the hire and has, just a ton of ideas and is innovative and trying new things and switching things up. We just don't know. But again, I think the natural inclination is to look at the unknown as negative, and I don't know if that's necessarily the thing to do here. You have to look at it both sides. If it's an unknown, you have to say, well, it could be really good over here, or it could be awful over here, and then kind of figure out your where you stand from there.
I do think, and I mentioned earlier that North Carolina fans had probably still some deep wounds and some burn marks from the Doherty fiasco that happened here. And I think that the beauty about the Doherty fiasco is I don't see anyone at UNC making those same mistakes. I think the likelihood of that is less likely with the two family hires that are being considered right now, and Wes Miller and Hubert Davis. I don't mean that they will automatically be successful and they will not have some heartburn and some road bumps or some bumps in the road like Doherty did. But I don't think you would have to worry about kind of some ego driven things or some situations where they come in and make the same mistakes that have already been made by a predecessor. I think there is enough learned institutionally that would prevent those guys from making those missteps. Um, Boys, I'm going to go ahead and ask this too about Hubert Davis. Is he too nice? I mean, Tommy and I talked about briefly on the air yesterday, and knowing how the game is changing. Uh, yeah, maybe college basketball is getting more into the CEO role, like you see with college football. I mean, you don't only have to look across campus to the Keenan Football Center and see where Mac Brown is more of a CEO, and he has his coordinators who are actually doing the implementation, position coaches who are actually doing the install. Do you see that happening more in college game, where a guy like Hubert, who some of the knock on him is that he is too nice, could that work and have Hubert in a CEO role? And then potentially have some really good Michigan does with Phil Martelli. That's not to say Juwan Howard isn't calling plays, but Phil Martelli as the old consigliere sage type to help kind of keep things rolling and give that ear when he needs it. I don't know. I'm throwing a lot of things out right here, but I want to kind of get you guys to speak on that part too, because I've heard Hubert may be too nice from some folks who are criticizing it. I've also heard that since he hasn't been the head coach, could he be put in a position to succeed by having someone else that's been around to be that consigliere? So Sean, I'll go to you first on that. There's a lot to digest there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been a criticism, but I don't think does it hold weight. Sure, but at the same time, I mean, the guy played for Pat Riley. He played back in the '90s when if you were too nice, there's no way you're playing in that era. So I think the main thing, does he have the competitive streak? I think obviously, and then really once again, it's going to come also down to if it's a Hubert or Wes, who else is on their staff? Who's going to be that guy that has the attention to detail on the scouts? Who's going to have the attention to detail on the recruits? Because I think really the era we're entering in now with the transfer portal, the G League recruits, the college game is rapidly changing. I mean, right now you have guys that they're not on the NBA radar and they're going to go pro after 2 years and they can start collecting the $35K from the G League, which normally they'd be staying 3 to 4 years. So I think, really it's how quickly can this staff adapt. And I think that all comes down to who's going to be on it. So I think once again, there's going to be risk with every even the proven guys in terms of their transition to Chapel Hill, obviously they've done it, and their names carry more weight right now. But that's not to say that a Hubert or Wes couldn't carry that in the future. And to Sherrell's point, there's going to be some group that isn't happy with what happens. But I think it's going to be a fascinating week. There's no perfect fit, but at the same time, I think just because there isn't that proven resume doesn't mean that it can't work out.
A lot of new potential and possibilities on the horizon. Sherrell, I'll let you have the last word. Any thoughts about all that big gumbo I threw at Sean just now?
I think so. I don't think the CEO thing I'm iffy about, just because basketball is so much more kind of in the moment. Like if you're a CEO, yeah, you make the final calls, but I mean, we're talking 4 seconds left in the game, you have to drop a play. You can't really like get consensus from your staff on what you want to happen. So I go back and forth on the CEO thing. I do think, like Sean said, that the staff is just so important, and I think not only just kind of quote unquote rock star staff. I don't think it needs to be that. I think cohesiveness and attention to detail is just as important as profile. So I try to keep that in the back of my mind, because some people, when it comes to assistants, some people just have certain skills that others don't, and it might be someone who's not well known. It might not be someone who was a head coach before, but they might do something really 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 well. So I try to keep that in the back of my mind when it comes to staffs, especially with Hubert Davis. And again, with him and Wes, it's just going to come down to their staff, how they kind of couch what they want to do and their style of play, and then just going out and getting on the recruiting trail and seeing what happens. Sean said college basketball has changed, and it really has. And that's one of the reasons that we're even having this conversation about a new head coach at North Carolina. Whoever it is, though, I think from the list that we have, the five right now, I think you can be sure that they will live up to some of the ideals, both on the court and off the court, that North Carolina has always espoused. So I don't think that is the worry. I think that's why one of the reasons the list looks the way it does. From there, yeah, I'm just curious to see what happens. And for I guess on a personal note for us, it's gonna be very very different, man. Very very different, because you kind of know how to attack whether or not Carolina is serious about a player under Roy Williams. There are 5 or 6 signs and steps that you have to go through under Roy Williams to get an offer. And then once you get an offer, if he calls within this amount of time, or if he does this, we know we have a flow chart. We know exactly where to go. So with the new coach, it's going to be different. It's going to be just going to be very different. So I just am, again, I don't want to say excited, because it is a strange time when it comes to UNC basketball. But
There's anxiety there, but you can be
yeah,
excited with anxiety.
yeah, just to see what happens and
Mhm.
see how our day to day changes as far as covering UNC and covering UNC recruiting. But yeah, I think by the next time, just my opinion, throwing it out there, I think by the next time we record one, we'll be talking about a new coach. So
Oh,
we'll see
I
what
assume
happens.
so. I assume we're
Yeah.
going to have to throw one of these up too, because it's going to change the recruiting landscape. And I'm going to hold you to showing that flow chart at some point down the road. We're going to have to share that with our listeners and our viewers to see what the old Roy Williams recruiting philosophy was like, because I know that'd be pretty interesting for a lot of folks. But
Well,
yeah, I
I
agree
mean,
with you.
I was on that. Not I was on that flow chart the night before, watching full game tape of Jonas Idu,
Mm.
and whatever the game I chose, it was not a great game for him. And I was like, all right, I'll watch another game before work begins, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, can put that on pause for
Remember
right
when
now.
Jonas Idu was the news?
Yeah. What? Yeah.
Remember that? That was
It
that
was-
was that was a fun 5 days ago. Um, Boys, I appreciate it as always. I think you guys bring a lot to the table. Any other, I always call it Sean's two pennies. Any other last nuggets you want to drop before we sign off for tonight, Sherelle?
Uh,
Baylor 4.5 is a trap.
It feels like it. It
Yeah.
feels very very trappy.
There's a trap. Yeah.
I think a lot of people are gonna think, oh, see, Gonzaga finally had a close game. That ain't how this works.
Mm-mm.
Sean, anything you want to add before we
Oh,
wrap up
I
tonight?
guess the two thought one. I'm going to be interested to watch how Davion Mitchell is in that game, because I think he could be how he's guarding. I think will be interesting from
They
a
go
UNC
as he goes very
perspective.
often. I agree with you there.
From a UNC perspective, Roy, obviously Roy Williams was one of the biggest names in the industry, but I think, for me, I think 2009 was the first time I saw it, was when I started really going to a lot of events. I was the City of Palms, and I remember him walking in, and everybody in the gym just their heads turned, and then it was probably 2012 where I really started doing more of the summer circuit, and whether it was a high school game or the live periods, he was the biggest, bigger than Calipari, I think bigger than Coach K when he walked in the gym. And even, during some of those times, you have CBS coming out with the polls of, top 20 coaches or top 20 recruits. And he's, they're not listing, the coaches themselves aren't listing Roy on either of them, but he would walk in a gym and everybody either wants to chat with him or they're watching him as he's walking by. And he was, in my opinion, I thought he was the biggest rock star you would have on those live recruiting, any recruiting event. And it's just sad to see him go, but it was definitely a fun 18 years and 3 championships that we got to see.
Yeah, I could see where that would be missing. The good news is Sherrell's still here, so you'll still get that rock star pop whenever he enters a gym nowadays. I mean, I can't wait till we get back to live events and he can go back to Peach Jam and have people stand up and giving him standing over the way they did 3 years ago.
No, I was going to say, Sean makes a great point, man. It is kind of, like a rock star, just retiring. Like I remember any number of high school games, and maybe this says a lot about Roy Williams, how, to Sean's point, everybody would want to see him. So you're watching the game, whatever high school player it was. I remember the first time I saw Leaky Black play, a small little gym in Concord, or sorry, in Harrisburg at Hickory Ridge, small little gym, and Roy Williams is sitting in the corner, and at halftime, just like half the stadium runs over to where Roy Williams is, and instead of like, oh, I'm going to the bathroom, he sat there and like took a picture with every single person who was waiting in line. They delayed the second half because there were so many people waiting for him to take a picture with him. And he just waited until they were all there. Now, at the end of the game, he went ahead and got out of there. But
Sure.
at halftime, he just, I think that says a lot about him, to Sean's point. Like he was like the rock star, of the last, to me, the last 20 years in college basketball.
And that just wasn't North Carolina. I remember being at well, these two names will bring it. It was a Tyus Jones versus my guy Rashad Vaughn game at Target Center.
Wait! Did you just Corey Alexander us?
My guy.
You just my guy Rashad Vaughn. All right, go ahead.
I did. But yeah, I mean, Target Center. Roy Williams walks in with Hubert, and I mean, this is Minnesota, and once again, halftime, everybody is lined up waiting to get to Roy Williams during that one. So it was always a sight to see when he did appear at whatever high school gym or AAU game.
It's probably going to be like that on golf courses around the country now for the next little while. But guys, I appreciate it.
Or craps tables.
Or craps tables at the casino. Yeah. Well, especially since they're opening up new casinos in West North Carolina. Man, that's going to be belly up to the dice game. Guys, I appreciate it. As always, you guys are great about making time for these, bringing your A games, even in a tumultuous week like this where you see an icon walk away from the game. And I'm with Sherrell. It's going to be so weird as we start getting into whoever the new hire is and finding, learning new nuance about how they coach and how they recruit and how they run a program. Because, I've learned a lot from y'all in the last year. I got to set all that on fire and we got to start over again. So we'll at least have each other to do that. But I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for listening and watching. Make sure you take a second to stop, rate, and review us. 5 stars if you feel it. If you don't like it, let us know, please. We're all churning out content right now. We want to make sure what we're doing is good. And if you want more news about the UNC coaching search and who's going to replace Roy Williams, stay locked into InsideCarolina.com. We will have the news as it breaks. We'll probably have some insight as we can get it and as our writers can confirm it. Just make sure you're watching IC to get your info. But for tonight, for Sherrell McMillan, for Sean Moran, I'm Joey Powell. This has been the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. We will talk at you soon. Late.